Australian Sailing National Rules and Officials Committee webcast of one of two, where we're looking at the new rules that will be introduced at the start of next calendar year. And we've got a sensational team of very experienced race officers, coaches and sailors here to provide the sailors of Australia with a short update on the new rules that are coming up. And so I'd like to introduce and welcome the people that you'll see on the screen as this goes by. First of all, Rob Ware, National Judge from Victoria. Rob, just raise your hand so people can identify you. Thanks, Rob. And joining Rob is Jeff Eldridge, a National Race Officer, and again, experienced person, been involved in World Championships all the way down to dinghy sailing. And we're delighted also to welcome Malcolm Page, in Victoria, the director of the Victorian Institute of Sport Sailing Program, and hopefully the 49er Olympic Tokyo coach. He is the coach. Hopefully he'll actually have an Olympics to go to. So we will. Thanks for a coach and a sailor's perspective. I'm Peter Merritt, the chair of the National Race Officials Committee. I'm located in Victoria, and we have representatives from officials committees around Australia. So on my screen at the moment, I can see Steve Hatch from New South Wales. Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Steve Hatch. I'm an international judge and umpire from Sydney.
Thanks, Steve. And from Queensland, although not on the screen at the moment, or at least my screen, is Louise Davis. Lou, I can see you there now. If you could introduce yourself, please. And you'll have to come off mute to do that.
Sorry, my bad. I'm International Race Officer, just trying to sit in the background.
Okay, thanks, Lou. And coming from the NT, we have Ed Vincent. Ed?
Good evening, all. It's Ed Vincent. I'm a National Race Officer.
And we have joining us also David Brooks. Are you there, David?
Yes, I'm here, Peter. I'm an international race officer, an international technical delegate, and a national judge. I represent Australia on the Race Officials Committee for World Sailing.
Fantastic. Well, if anyone's got any questions, we can send our feedback to you. And joining us from Australian Sailing, and thank you for organising this, is Melanie Peasy, who works with Glenn Stanaway at Australian Sailing. And Melanie is the Safety Rules and Representation Coordinator. Melanie, do you want to say hello?
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today, and I hope that this makes a little bit more sense for you all when you're out on the water.
Thanks, Melanie. And without further ado, we're going to have Rob, Jeff and Mel are going to run us through over the next 20 minutes or so the important things that the sailors across Australia need to keep in mind when the new rules are introduced on the 1st of January 2021. So over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Peter. I suppose you've already said that this presentation is focused on the racing rules changes as they might be of particular interest to the sailors. Obviously of wider interest than that. But we haven't addressed all of the changes, of which there are many, and probably 80% of them are improvements in the wording of a rule, but don't actually represent a game change to the sailors. So we're focused on those that do represent perhaps potential game changes, and I'll make some comments, and Jeff will comment as to the implication for sailors from a race management point of view, not particularly what the race management people need to know. And of course, from a coaching point of view, we have one of the top sailors in Australia in Al Page. So that's the team. So we'll start with this. We'll start with additional race signals. So we've got an orange flag and a blue flag, which are now mandated. Jeff, how does that go?
Well, the orange flag is really the new one. It's been in the rules for some time, but it's now been included in the race signals. And the blue flag's been there in the race signals for a while, but the meaning has now changed in that it now explicitly denotes the end of the finishing line.
So Mel, what's the coach's point of view?
To me, this is just a fundamental rule that your athletes and sailors should be aware of. Navigation 101. And I hate when silly fundamental things cause problems within your races. So I think this is something that you should be able to lock in and know as a fundamental rule. Of course, the wind shifts in your competitors will bring you bad results, and that's how it should be, not from a silly mistake by not knowing your flags.
Thanks very much. That's important, and I suppose for all of this, we're dealing with abbreviated explanations, but the sailors do need to go back and have a look at the rules themselves. And there's a really good publication by World Sailing, which is the new rules, the study version of those rules, which is available for download. And if you have trouble sleeping at night, that's a good read. But jokes aside, it's terribly important that you understand all those things. So just moving on then for definitions start and finish, there's a bit of a change there because it now refers only to the hull rather than the hull and equipment and crew. So Jeff, how's that go?
Well, that's going to be a little bit of a change in judging both the start line and the finish line as to whether a boat's over before the start or when they've finished. Obviously, the video of the 18 footers that Steve Hatch provided gives us a very good idea of what it is now once the hull is the only thing that is under consideration, with a bowsprit can be over the line before the start.
Not to mention the crew on the wire,
not to mention someone sailing down the line with their crew out on the wire over the line prior to the start with the hull behind the line.
So how does that apply to starting penalties? If you're over early and you've got to come back, how far do you have to come back?
Well, you've really only got to get all of your hull behind the line. So if you're coming downwind and you come in, generally people will try and round up so they're just behind the line and come around. Prior to 1st of January, obviously they've got to get their wings and their person on the trap behind the line as well. But after the 1st of January, so long as the hull's behind the leading edge of the line, if the person out on the wire is halfway over the line, it won't matter anymore.
Hey Mel, how's that go?
To me, it probably doesn't change much around your race strategy, but what a great tool to know for racing. Many races are won and lost by inches. And knowing this small detail, especially in those boats that have bowsprits or maybe people are out in trapezes from the gunnel or from a wing, knowing that you can use that to your advantage, I think is going to be to your advantage opposed to maybe one of your competitors. So, it won't change your race strategy about keeping the pedal to the metal until you've, got across that finish line. And I'd recommend to go well beyond the finish line, and that'll give you the best chance to use this clarification on this rule.
Thank you. Now, in terms of overlaps between boats out on the course, does the same set of conditions apply, or are we're still going with the appendages on the boat, the crew in normal position as far as overlaps is concerned?
Yeah, there's obviously no change in regards to all the equipment is included for overlaps and the clarification of those situations when it happens on the water. So, remember the human body or the bowsprit or any sails are included in the normal sailing position, will be included within any overlaps or establishing overlaps.
It seems like a reasonable proposition. You wouldn't want to luff across somebody's stern in an 18-footer and take out the going trapeze, would you? Okay. Now, I'm just moving on to some basic principles. Sportsmanship, there's a bit of there's no real game changer here, but it's worth remembering that sportsmanship, that part of our rules under which we sail, that is, to me, so important that it doesn't even have a rule number. It's right at the beginning, and it says in part that sportsmanship requires that competitors have to follow and enforce the rules between themselves. Like, it's not an umpired sport, it's up to the competitors to obey and enforce the rules. Mal?
I always think you should follow the rules, and I've had a good saying in my life. If you work hard and be good to your mother, then the world will repay you about 10 times over. And I think it's a good principle to stick by.
That should be in the racing rules of sailing, Mal. Okay. So there's some rearrangement of the rules with regard to support persons, and my take on this is that support persons have been really part of our game for a long while, but the rules now recognise the role of support persons fully integrated into the rules as part of the game, and that they'll be then subject to the rules in accordance with the racing rules of sailing and any requirements that are set out in the notice of race or sailing instructions. So Mel, what's your take on that?
And I think this is great to see that the whole family within our sport is being recognised. And I know around the Olympic scene, the support boat regulations have been increasing across the last few quads. And I think also a lot of common sense has come along with this. And certainly when it's coming to any assistance of boats, when it's from a safety perspective, it's going to be allowed within the rules. Of course, you aren't allowed to give any material gain to that boat, but from a safety perspective, it's allowed to come in, and then that boat can continue racing from that situation. And again, it's one of those fundamental things for me that you should know the rules, because there's nothing worse, and I've seen it even happen at the Olympic Games when the support people have been penalised, and it's varied from levels of missing racing on the water, not being allowed to attend the Olympic venue, right through to being banned from the event itself. And there'd be nothing worse if it would go to the next level where the actual athletes, sailors get penalised from points because of the support person breaking those rules.
So I suppose in recognising that they're part of the game, which is a great thing, there's also an obligation on them to behave properly, and not. We're talking. My next subject was outside help, so support persons are now obliged to provide help to sailors in danger or difficulty, whether they're their charges or not, and won't be penalised for it. But that's a great move forward. But it imposes something of an obligation on them to behave properly, wouldn't you think?
Without a doubt. And I'd like to think that people would do this out of the goodness of their heart. And I know when the stakes are high and sheep stations are on the line, maybe there's temptation not to. But it's good to see that the rules are there to keep our sportsmanship strong within our sport, and of course ultimately make sure that the rules are played in a fair, common sense way, so that the sailors prove themselves from getting that little boat around, the marks, the course, in the fastest manner.
Good stuff. And I have seen on the other side of that fence instances in the past where, for instance, little kids and an optimist get themselves into trouble when they're got the main sheet wrapped around their ankle and they're over the side or something, and they refuse help from a support boat. So we've hopefully got rid of that sort of thing where they're told they shouldn't receive help because they'll get disqualified for it. We're interested in safety and fair sailing above all those things. Now I'll move on. I have something here about fair sailing, but I think we've actually dealt with that pretty much. You've expressed that very well, Mal. Now, when boats meet and room to tack at an obstruction, it used to be in the previous set of rules, or you had to make a hail. Now the rules have been changed a bit so that there are the hail. There's some additional requirements, and the hail doesn't need to be made in English. We discussed that before, didn't we, Mel?
Yeah, we did. And I'm probably not very good at English, let alone another language. But I think this rule change is, again, a little bit of a common sense thing. It's very obvious normally what the competitor is asking of yourself if you're the competitor. It might be in a different language, or it might be sometimes an oi oi oi, or some sort of grunt or moan for them. But it's normally pretty clear of what rule that they're asking for. And I think it's great to have this common sense layer in there now. And I always give advice to my sailors that I work with is, to get on with the job, abide by what they're asking, and then if there's any technicality issue that might have been in the representation of that rule, then that's something you can fight on later back on shore. You can talk it over with your competitor, or if it's serious enough, of course, take it to the protest room.
There's also an added bit to that now, that there's some words in the rules which allow hand signals, which might amplify what you're asking for in hailing for room.
Yeah, and it's certainly something now in fleet racing rule book that where the hand signals is it's a visual sign of what they're asking for, let alone the verbal message they might be sending you. And it's something that's part of that technical process now within the rules. So again, it's something you need to know no matter which situation you in the right-of-way boat or the boat that must give way.
I think this comes from match racing, where it's actually more intense or immediate, and you need to be understood. So this I think is a good transition into fleet racing.
Yes, and also note that the notice of race can now mandate alternative means of communication, which may be the radio frequency or something else, dependent on the type of event. So that's another thing to be aware of. It may not be something that you need to know out on the water, may not be in the sailing instructions. It may in actual fact be in the notice of race.
All right, and thanks very much, Jeff. And next on my list is exoneration, but I think we've pretty much discussed that. But just to go back over that, if you're forced to break a rule by another boat breaking a rule, Mel, what would you recommend in terms of protesting the other boat or what have you?
Of course, if you get yourself in trouble around this situation, and this one always carries a little bit of ambiguity to it. So, and I would love to be clear on it, but I think the very important thing to do is to always follow that process. And if that does happen on the water, and there is a situation of 3 boats that are within an incident, and you might be the meat in the sandwich, and you feel like another boat has caused you to penalise a third boat, it's always very important to follow the rules. One, know the rules, to clearly state that at the time, to also look around who might be able to witness you, to support you in that process, and ensure you want them on your side, and of course do that a proper process of hailing protest. So if you haven't done that on the water, then it can't be followed up with later. And also that will help cover if for some reason you get back ashore and find that that third boat, what you weren't aware of, is protesting you, and then you have that due diligence that you did on the water that then you can take on the on-water process to hopefully protect yourself and give yourself the best chance to keep without another letter on your scorecard.
Yes, of course, the rule's talking about exoneration, but how you get there is actually, as you just said, is actually quite important.
So,
all
Rob,
right.
what's the actual rule change that applies around exoneration? What's changed from as it is today to when it'll be next year?
Okay, what it says, if you are forced to break a rule by a boat that's breaking a rule against you, you are exonerated. But it's a matter of, in the practical application of that, is when you get ashore and somebody has a different argument, or you say, well, I didn't do my turns, even though I ran into somebody else or the mark or whatever, I didn't do any penalty because I would be exonerated. And then there's maybe an argument about, well, whether the exoneration was proper or not. So the rules don't actually spell this out, but I think the answer which Mel's given is spot on, and that if you have broken a rule because you've been forced to do so by another boat breaking a rule against you, you are exonerated, but you need to demonstrate that exoneration would be applied correctly, and that probably the best way I can think of is, as Mel said, you hail protest to the other boat, or tell them to ask them to do their turns or whatever. If they do their turns, then it's all over. If they don't do their turns and they say up you, well, it wasn't my fault, then you have to defend yourself in the room.
Thank you.
Have I got that right, Mel?
Sounds like a boat race to me.
Okay, now just getting towards the end, but I've got an item here on crew limitations that says the rule says that that a person leaving a boat by accident, falling overboard, must only be back in contact with the boat before the boat continues racing, rather than be back on board. So there's some interesting things there. So you can keep racing if you or your crew member is still hanging on the main sheet or the gunnel or whatever. So that's not unreasonable. But Jeff, I'll ask you, what's that mean if this happens pretty close to the finish line?
Well, if it happens pretty close to the finish line, so long as the person in the water isn't trying to propel the boat over the line, once the hull goes over the finish line, they will be recorded finished. And even if you thought they were, you'd still record the boat crossing the line and make a note. You know, if it's a good breeze, then that sort of situation's a little bit unlikely. But in a light breeze, if it looked like the boat was being propelled, then obviously you take note and investigate and potentially protest. But if they're in the water and they're in contact, that's fine. So,
all right, and I have a question for Mal, and that is, what's in contact mean? Does it mean you have to be hanging onto the main sheet or swimming alongside the boat, or what do you reckon that means?
Oh, that's a very good question, but I think it's something that I wouldn't advise you to go and practice or train for. But I think it is really bringing that importance to stay in contact with the boat. And to me, contact is, via a rope or, grip on whatever part of the equipment that you're holding on, and you're still part of that boat. And I must admit, I recall some races, and I've seen people round marks or finish races in very peculiar ways, very often backwards, sometimes nosediving, and very often capsized. So I guess what it is the rules allowing you to do is express the style that you want to sail the boat. So good luck.
Good advice. Thanks very much. Now, the last of my points is about hearings, protests, and just make a couple of points. That first of all, we can now protest and penalise support persons as well as competitors, and the penalty for a support person might be that, as Mel said earlier, they are banned from the venue or some other lesser penalty. But it could also be that the finding of the protest committee might be that the misbehaviour of the support person has unfairly advantaged the competitor, in which case the competitor could also be penalised. I don't, Mal, do you want to comment about that?
I know I said more depth about what has happened in the Olympic scene a little earlier on, but the support people are there to help the athletes, and of course breaking these rules and not following the guidelines that have been set only just creates an environment that is not conducive for that athlete to perform in its best level. So, for me, it's something that you really need to understand. It's one of those fundamental things that you can control. So make sure you know the rules, and obviously give that opportunity for your athlete sailor, if you're that support person, to perform at the best of their ability.
And behave properly.
Much better just to follow the rules and get on with the job.
Absolutely. So my final thing with regard to protests or hearings is that there's now provision for the inclusion of hearsay evidence. And that's all very well, but given that the standard of proof that's required is on the balance of probabilities and not a higher level of higher standard of proof. The problem there is that hearsay evidence can't be questioned or examined in a protest hearing. You hear what the bloke says, I heard him say, and you can't say, well, did you hear it properly? So the benefit of it is obvious, but it's limited. And consistent with that is video evidence, which I've had some experience of, and Darren would know very well. But you can't always rely on what video evidence says, because of the limitations of the video system, depth of field and the video camera moving and so on. But protest committees can take all this evidence into account, and they would weight the evidence according to those limitations. That's it. So I think I'm finished, Peter.
Thanks, Rob. And this is part one, or video one of two that we're doing. So any of you race officials out there that are keen to know how the rules will impact you, come along to we'll take a look at our second video, which will be coming out in about a week's time after this one. The other item that I'd add, probably more so with my race official hat on, but it impacts on sailors, is that if a sailor, as a race official, we can't make a boat score worse without a protest hearing. There's a very substantial change in the new rules, whereby if, and typically this occurs if a boat, for example, misses a mark and we become aware of it through a report from our race management team, or then we can actually, if a boat doesn't sail the course, the race officer can now score that boat with the equivalent of a disqualification without a hearing, and so that'll save some complexity when we know boats haven't sailed the course because they've skipped a mark. It saves a bit of time enabling us to make that score change. Of course, the boats always has the opportunity of requesting redress if we've made a mistake, but yeah, so look forward to further updates from a race official's perspective in our next video. Just going round the table, Steve Hatch, is there anything that struck you in the new rules that you'd like, from a sailor's perspective, that you'd like to mention?
No, I think, they're pretty straightforward, what the guys have covered. And, but yeah, the best advice they can get, I think, is to, what Mal gave you, is to know the rules, use them where necessary, sail fast and get around the course. And try to stay out of the protest room, because the protest room is the most dangerous place you can go.
Probably great advice, and Mel said similar things. Sail fast and is a great idea. David Brooks, from your insights from World Sailing, are there any inside gossip you would pass on to us in terms of the new rules?
The union dispute has me on the other side. I'm on race officials committee, not racing rules, and I can't go across the other side of the room. But I can say that the judges get upset. I can say that there's probably going to be some more updates come through. I think there's some more urgent submissions. They've looked at these and found that they can tweak these rules just a little bit clearer and help them out much better than what we can see at the moment. So I think we'll see some more come through. But I think they've done a really good job in trying to simplify the rules, because they are very complex. They're open to a lot of interpretation. So I think they've tried to clarify some of the rules. And this is just an ongoing process. Hopefully we'll see in the next 4 years an even simpler set of rules, so that the sailors can understand what's happening, rather than leave a lot of it up to the judges making interpretations.
Yeah, that's always a dangerous thing, isn't it? Thanks, David. Lou, anything from your perspective you'd like to mention?
No, but I'd just like to thank everyone for their presentation. It was really informative. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lou. And Ed, anything from yourself?
No, look, I think once again I'd also like to thank Rob and Mal and Jeff, but these new changes of just simplifying and clarifying some of the things that we've understood, apart from those significant changes, which I think will make the sport better. Okay,
thanks very much. And so I'd add my thanks, of course, to Rob Ware, who led the charge in putting this presentation together, very well supported by Jeff Eldridge, and we were delighted that Malcolm Page was able to join us.